The afternoon light filtered through the sheer curtains of Leah Carter's makeshift home office, casting long shadows across the cluttered desk where invoices competed for space with color swatches and vendor contracts. She rubbed her temples, trying to focus on the spreadsheet that refused to balance when her phone rang with an unfamiliar number. Leah Carter Events, she answered, injecting professional confidence into her voice despite the chaos surrounding her. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. Ms. Carter, this is Evelyn Hart from the Hartford Foundation. I hope I'm not catching you at a difficult time. Leah's pulse quickened. The Hartford Foundation, one of the city's most prestigious nonprofits, known for their annual charity galas that grace the society pages and raised millions for underprivileged youth. She straightened in her chair as if Evelyn could see her through the phone. Not at all, Miss Hart. How can I help you? I'll cut straight to the point. We've had an unexpected situation with our event planning team, and we need someone who can step in immediately to handle our annual gala. It's our biggest fundraiser of the year, typically draws over 500 guests, including some very prominent donors. The event is in 6 weeks. 6 weeks! Leah's mind raced through the logistics. Venue coordination, catering, entertainment, decorations, marketing. It was an impossibly tight timeline for an event of that magnitude, but it was also the opportunity she'd been working toward for the past 3 years of building her business. I'd be very interested in discussing this with you. Could you tell me more about your vision for the event? This year's theme is Bridges to Tomorrow. We want to emphasize connection, hope, and the transformative power of education. We're looking for someone who can think creatively, not just execute a standard corporate event. Your work on the Children's Hospital benefit last spring caught our attention. The way you transformed that ballroom into an enchanted Varden was exactly the kind of innovative thinking we need. Leah felt a warm surge of validation. That event had been one of her proudest achievements, even though the budget had been modest compared to what the Hartford Foundation likely commanded. I appreciate that feedback. Creative storytelling through event design is exactly what I'm passionate about. When you say booked and our major sponsors are expecting something spectacular, there's also significant media attention around this event. Are you confident you can deliver under this kind of prestiges? To tomorrow, I'm already envisioning ways to literally and metaphorically incorporate bridge elements, suspended lighting installations that connect different areas of the venue, interactive displays that show the journey from education to opportunity. Yes, Evelyn interrupted, excitement evident in her voice. That's exactly the kind of vision we need. I have to be honest with you, Miss Carter. This is a high-stakes situation. We've already sent save the dates. The venue is booked, and our major sponsors are expecting something spectacular. There's also significant media attention around this event. Are you confident you can deliver under this kind of pressure? I took a deep breath, thinking of all the late nights I'd spent building my business, the rejection letters from potential clients who wanted to see more experience on my resume, the financial struggles that had kept me living paycheck to paycheck. This was my moment. I understand the pressure, and I'm ready for it. I have a network of reliable vendors, and I work best when the stakes are high. I'd love to meet with you to discuss the details. Excellent. There is one thing I should mention. Our PR department is currently in transition. We had a recent layoff, and we're bringing in temporary consultants to handle media coordination. You'll need to work directly with whoever we assign to manage that aspect of the event. Of course, I'm comfortable collaborating with PR teams. Wonderful. Can you come in tomorrow at 10? I'll have our initial planning documents ready, and you can meet the PR liaison we've arranged. After hanging up, Leah sat in stunned silence for a moment before grabbing her phone to call Jordan, her best friend since college and the closest thing she had to family in the city. Jordan, you're not going to believe this. Did you finally get that payment from the Rodriguez wedding? Better. I just got offered the Hartford Foundation Gala. The Hartford Foundation? Leah, that's huge. That's like society page, red carpet, politicians, and celebrities huge. I know, she laughed, the reality finally sinking in. 6 weeks to plan it, 500 guests, and apparently some very important people will be watching. And you said yes, obviously. Obviously. This could change everything, Jordan. This is the kind of client that leads to other high-profile clients. I could actually build the business I've been dreaming about. There was a pause on the other end. I'm thrilled for you, Leah, really. But just be careful, okay? When you're dealing with that level of wealth and influence, there are always politics involved. Don't let anyone push you around or take credit for your work. You worry too much. I can handle myself. I know you can, but promise me you'll trust your instincts if something feels off. These people didn't get where they are by being nice. After they hung up, Leah spent the evening researching the Hartford Foundation's previous events, taking notes on their aesthetic preferences and demographics. She fell asleep at her desk, head pillowed on vendor catalogs, dreaming of crystal chandeliers and standing ovations. The Hartford Foundation's headquarters occupied 3 floors of a gleaming downtown office building, all glass and steel that reflected the morning sun like a beacon of corporate success. Leah adjusted her portfolio bag on her shoulder and smoothed her black blazer, her one truly professional outfit purchased specifically for client meetings like this. The elevator opened onto a reception area that could have been featured in an architecture magazine. Minimalist furniture, abstract art, and a receptionist who looked like she'd stepped out of a fashion spread. "Ms. Carter? Ms. Hart is waiting for you in the conference room. Right this way." Leah followed her down a hallway lined with photos from previous galas, elegant ballrooms filled with well-dressed donors, oversized checks being presented to grateful recipients, smiling politicians cutting ribbons and shaking hands. Soon, she hoped, there would be photos from her event among them. The Hartford Foundation's conference room's floor-to-ceiling windows offered a panoramic view of the city. Evelyn Hart, a woman in her 50s with silver hair and sharp eyes, rose to greet her. "Leah, thank you for coming. I'm so excited to get started on this project." "Thank you for the opportunity. I've been looking forward to discussing the details." Before we dive in, let me introduce you to our PR consultant who will be handling media coordination for the event. Evelyn gestured toward the far end of the conference table, where a woman with perfectly styled blonde hair was arranging folders with military precision. When she looked up, Leah felt the blood drain from her face. Margaret Weber, her aunt. The woman who'd spent Leah's teenage years making it clear that she wasn't smart enough, ambitious enough, or polished enough to succeed in the real world. The woman who had dismissed Leah's college major as impractical and her business dreams as unrealistic. The woman Leah had carefully avoided at family gatherings for the past 5 years. Margaret Weber, Evelyn continued, oblivious to the tension suddenly crackling in the room. "She's stepping in temporarily after some recent changes in our communications department. Margaret has extensive corporate experience and excellent media connections." Margaret's smile was perfectly professional, but Leah caught the flicker of surprise in her eyes before she composed herself. "Leah, what a pleasant surprise." "Hello, Margaret." Leah forced her voice to remain steady, though her heart was pounding. Evelyn glanced between them. "Oh, do you two know each other?" "Leah is my niece, though I have to admit, I wasn't aware she was working in event planning now." The slight emphasis on now carried all the implications Margaret intended, that this was likely just another of Leah's fleeting career experiments, like the art classes she'd taken after college or the brief stint working at a gallery. "I've been building my business for 3 years, Leah replied, keeping her tone professional despite the familiar surge of defensive anger. "I specialize in nonprofit and charity events." "How enterprising," Margaret said, opening one of her folders. "I hope you understand the level of sophistication this event requires. The Hartford Foundation's gala is attended by some very influential people who expect a certain standard of excellence." Leah felt the familiar childhood sensation of shrinking under Margaret's scrutiny, but forced herself to maintain eye contact. "I'm confident in my ability to exceed those expectations." Evelyn, apparently sensing undercurrents she didn't quite understand, cleared her throat. "Well, I'm sure you'll work wonderfully together. Shall we review the event specifications?" For the next hour, they discussed logistics, budgets, and timelines. Margaret interjected frequently with questions that felt more like challenges, Did Leah have experience with events of this scale? Had she worked with high-profile media before? Was she prepared for the level of scrutiny that came with such a visible project? Each question was perfectly reasonable on the surface, but Leah recognized the pattern from family dinners, where Margaret would quiz her about her college grades or job prospects, always with an undertone suggesting that Leah was somehow falling short of reasonable expectations. "I think we've covered the basics," Evelyn finally said, gathering her materials. "Leah, I'll email you the vendor contact list and our initial budget breakdown. Margaret, can you send her the media timeline and the list of confirmed VIPs? "Of course," Margaret replied, "though I do think we should discuss the PR strategy in more detail. Managing media for an event of this caliber requires significant experience." "I'm sure we can coordinate effectively," Leah said, her patience wearing thin. After Evelyn left, Leah and Margaret stood alone in the conference room, the city sprawling below them through the massive windows. "So," Margaret said, closing her laptop with a sharp click, "event planning, this is what you're doing now." "This is what I've been doing, successfully. For 3 years, you said. That's quite a leap from your art history degree." "Art history taught me about visual storytelling, cultural context, and attention to detail. All very relevant skills." Margaret's smile was thin. "Of course. I'm just surprised you didn't mention your new career path at Christmas dinner." Leah had skipped Christmas dinner specifically to avoid conversations like this one. "I've been busy building my client base." "Well, I hope you understand what you're taking on here. The Hartford Foundation isn't some small-scale charity event. These are serious people with serious expectations. One mistake could be very visible." The threat was subtle but clear. Margaret was positioning herself as the experienced professional who would be watching for Leah's inevitable failure. "I appreciate your concern," Leah said, slinging her portfolio bag over her shoulder. "I'll send you my preliminary timeline by tomorrow morning." As she walked toward the elevator, Leah's phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "How did it go? Are you going to be planning galas for celebrities now?" She typed back quickly, "It's complicated. I'll call you later." The elevator doors closed and Leah leaned against the wall, closing her eyes. She'd gotten the contract she'd dreamed of, but it came with a complication she never could have anticipated. Working with Margaret would be like performing with a critic who had already written a negative review, just waiting for her to stumble so they could say, "I told you so." But she'd met what she told Evelyn. She worked best under pressure. And if that pressure included proving to Margaret Weber that she was capable of more than her aunt had ever imagined, so be it. 2 days later, Leah was deep in vendor negotiations when her phone rang with Evelyn's number. "Leah, I'm afraid we have a situation. Margaret's consulting arrangement has ended earlier than expected. Budget constraints related to the recent layoffs. Our internal PR team is completely overwhelmed, and we need someone to coordinate the media aspects of the gala. I know it's outside your usual scope, but given the timeline, would you be willing to take this on? We can adjust your contract accordingly." Yes, I think I can manage that." Her mind was already racing through the logistics. She'd need help, but most of the PR work was really just organized communication and relationship management. "I'll need to bring in an assistant, though, someone to help coordinate the additional workload." "Of course, whatever you need. I just need someone I can trust to handle this professionally. The guest list includes several prominent donors and a few local politicians. We can't afford any mistakes with the media outreach." After hanging up, Leah stared at her laptop screen, weighing her options. She could try to hire a freelance PR specialist, but finding someone qualified on short notice would be impossible. She could attempt to handle everything herself, but that would mean 18-hour days and the very real possibility of something falling through the cracks. Her phone rang again, Jordan as if summoned by her stress.
"Please tell me you're calling with good news," she answered. "Actually, I was calling to see if you'd murdered your aunt yet. You sounded pretty tense yesterday. Margaret's contract got terminated. Budget cuts. Now Evelyn wants me to handle the PR coordination, too." Okay, that's either really good news or really bad news. More money, more responsibility, more ways for things to go wrong. Exactly. And I need to find an assistant immediately. Do you know anyone with PR experience who's available for 6 weeks of intensive work? Jordan was quiet for a moment. This is going to sound crazy, but what about Margaret? What about Margaret? Think about it. She's available, she has the exact experience you need, and she already knows the project details. Plus, this way, she'd be working for you instead of alongside you. Leah nearly dropped the phone. Jordan, are you insane? She spent 2 hours the other day questioning my competence. Right. But now she's unemployed and you're the one with the contract. The power dynamic is completely different. She would never agree to work as my assistant. Maybe not as your assistant, but as your PR coordinator. You said Evelyn increased your budget. You could offer her a consulting fee that makes it worth her while. Leah found herself actually considering it. Margaret did have the connections and experience that would be invaluable for an event of this scale. And there was something appealing about the idea of Margaret having to take direction from her instead of the other way around. It's a terrible idea, she said finally. Probably, but it might also be brilliant. Besides, what's the worst that could happen? She could sabotage the entire event. Could she, though? If she's working for you, her professional reputation is tied to your success. She has just as much incentive as you do to make this event spectacular. After they hung up, Leah spent an hour staring at Margaret's contact information. The logical part of her brain ran through all the reasons it was a bad idea. Their history, Margaret's condescending attitude, the potential for conflict. But the practical part of her brain kept circling back to the simple fact that she needed help and Margaret was uniquely qualified to provide it. Finally, she dialed the number. Margaret Weber. It's Leah. I have a proposition for you. There was a pause. I'm listening. Evelyn just called. Your consulting contract was terminated due to budget issues, but they still need PR coordination for the gala. She's asked me to take on that responsibility and bring in my own team. I'd like to offer you a position as PR coordinator reporting directly to me. The silence stretched long enough that Leah wondered if the call had dropped. You want to hire me, Margaret said finally. I want to hire your expertise. The event needs someone with your connections and experience. I'm prepared to offer you a competitive daily rate for the remaining 5 weeks. As your employee? As my PR coordinator. You'd handle media outreach, VIP management, and press coordination. I'd oversee the overall event strategy and make final decisions on PR approach. Another long pause. Leah could almost hear Margaret's internal struggle, the need for income warring with her pride. What kind of daily rate are we discussing? Leah named a figure that made her wince internally, but that she knew was fair for Margaret's level of experience. I see. And you'd be my supervisor in this arrangement? I'd be the lead event coordinator, yes. But I'm not interested in a power struggle, Margaret. I need someone who can execute PR strategy effectively and professionally. If you can do that, we'll work well together. I'll need to see the scope of work in writing. Of course, I'll email you a detailed outline by this evening, but I need an answer by tomorrow morning. The timeline doesn't allow for extended negotiations. I understand. I'll review your proposal and get back to you. After hanging up, Leah realized her hands were shaking slightly. She'd just offered her aunt a job, knowing full well that it could either be the solution to her staffing problem or the beginning of 6 weeks of professional warfare. Her phone buzzed with a text from Margaret. Proposal received. I accept your offer. When do we start? Leah stared at the message, equal parts relieved and terrified. She'd gotten the help she needed, but she'd also just invited her harshest critic to have a front row seat to either her greatest professional triumph or her most spectacular failure.
Either way, it was going to be an interesting 6 weeks. Margaret arrived at Leah's office Monday morning at precisely 9 o'clock, carrying a leather portfolio and wearing the kind of tailored suit that cost more than Leah's monthly rent. She surveyed the cramped space, Leah's desk pushed against one wall, a folding table serving as a secondary workspace, vendor catalogs stacked on every available surface, with barely concealed disapproval. "This is cozy," Margaret said, settling into the single guest chair. "It's functional," Leah replied, not looking up from her vendor spreadsheet. "I've emailed you the contact list for confirmed vendors and the preliminary timeline. Your first priority should be updating the media invitation list and confirming RSVPs from the VIP attendees." Margaret opened her portfolio with crisp efficiency. "I've already reviewed the materials you sent. I have some concerns about your vendor selections." Leah finally looked up. "What kind of concerns?" "Well, for instance, this catering company." Margaret tapped her pen against Leah's notes. "Midwest Catering is adequate for smaller events, but for something of this caliber, shouldn't we be considering more established firms? Gourmet Solutions has handled events for the governor's mansion. Midwest Catering has an excellent reputation, and their menu proposals perfectly match our theme. Plus, they're within budget." Budget considerations are important, but we also need to think about perception. When society reporters write about this event, they notice details like catering quality. It reflects on the foundation's standards. The familiar knot of frustration began forming in Leah's stomach. This was exactly what she'd feared. Margaret questioning every decision, invoking her supposed superior knowledge of how things are done in high society events. "I've worked with Midwest Catering before. Their quality is excellent. For smaller charity dinners, perhaps. But this guest list includes people who dine at establishments where the chef has Michelin stars. Are we really going to serve them rubber chicken and wilted salad?" Leah set down her pen deliberately. "Margaret, I hired you to handle PR coordination, not to second-guess my vendor decisions. If you have specific concerns about a vendor's ability to execute, we can discuss them. But I'm not changing proven vendors based on social assumptions." Margaret's smile was sharp. "Of course, I'm simply offering perspective based on my experience with corporate events." The morning devolved from there. Margaret questioned Leah's color scheme. "Don't you think navy and gold is rather predictable?" Suggested more sophisticated alternatives to Leah's decoration concepts, and repeatedly referenced her own experience working with Fortune 500 executives and high-net-worth clients. By lunch, Leah was ready to throttle her aunt with the flower arrangement samples. The breaking point came during a conference call with Evelyn to review progress. Leah was midway through explaining the timeline for final vendor confirmations when Margaret interrupted. "Evelyn, I think we should also discuss the possibility of upgrading some of our vendor selections. Given the profile of this event, we want to ensure every detail reflects the foundation's commitment to excellence." Leah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Margaret, we've already confirmed our vendors based on quality and budget parameters." "He's one of the most influential social media voices covering charity events in the city, and he just told 30,000 people that we're amateurs who can't handle basic communication." "I see. Well, I used the contact database I had available. Perhaps if you had provided more current information." "I'm just thinking about long-term relationships. For instance, if we were to work with Gourmet Solutions for catering, they handle events for several other major nonprofits. It could open doors for future collaborations." "The vendors I've selected are perfectly appropriate for this event," Leah said firmly. "They were chosen based on their ability to execute our specific vision within budget." There was a pause on the call. "Leah," Evelyn said carefully, "I trust your judgment completely. If you're confident in your vendor selections, that's what matters." After the call ended, Leah turned to face Margaret directly.
Don't ever undermine me in front of a client again. Margaret's eyebrows rose with practiced innocence. I was simply offering input. Isn't collaboration the whole point of working together? Collaboration involves discussing concerns privately before presenting alternatives to the client. What you just did was make me look indecisive and unprofessional. I hardly think I don't care what you think about my vendors or my color choices or my level of sophistication. I'm the lead coordinator on this project, which means my decisions are final unless there's a legitimate operational concern. If you can't work within that structure, you're welcome to find other employment. Margaret's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine surprise. This wasn't the passive niece she remembered from family gatherings. The young woman who would sit quietly while Margaret offered unsolicited career advice and barely disguised criticism. "Of course," Margaret said smoothly. "I apologize if I overstepped. I'm simply accustomed to a more collaborative approach in corporate environments." This isn't a corporate environment. This is my business, my client, and my event. I hired you for your PR expertise, not to redesign my entire approach. As Margaret gathered her materials to leave, Leah caught a glimpse of something that might have been respect in her aunt's expression. Or maybe it was just calculation, Margaret reassessing the balance of power now that Leah had drawn clear boundaries. Either way, it felt like a small victory. "Margaret, stop." Leah's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. "I gave you access to the Foundation's media database. This is exactly the kind of mistake that could cost us everything." "I think you're overreacting. One person's social media complaint hardly constitutes a crisis. Devin Hale's opinion influences half the potential attendees at this event. If he decides we're incompetent, that narrative will spread through the entire social circle we're trying to reach." Leah spent the rest of the morning in damage control mode, reaching out to correct contacts, sending personalized apologies for the confusion, and crafting a response strategy that might contain the fallout from Devin's public criticism. That evening, she asked Margaret to stay after hours for what she euphemistically called a project review. They sat in Leah's small office as the sun set outside, the building quiet around them. "We need to talk about what happened today," Leah began. Margaret straightened in her chair. "I've already explained that I used the available contact information. If there were inaccuracies, that's not entirely my fault." "Margaret, you sent media invitations to email addresses that haven't been active for years. This isn't about blame, it's about the fact that mistakes like this can destroy our credibility. I hardly think one social media post. Will you please stop minimizing this? Devin Hale has already influenced 2 other bloggers to question our competence. One of our major sponsors called Evelyn this afternoon asking if there were concerns about the event management. This is exactly the kind of thing that spirals into cancellations and lost funding." For the first time since starting the project, Margaret looked genuinely uncomfortable. I apologize. I should have verified the contact information more carefully." "Yes, you should have. And going forward, every piece of communication you send needs to be double-checked. Every contact verified. Every email proofread. We cannot afford any more mistakes." Margaret nodded. Her usual confidence noticeably dimmed. Leah felt heat rise in her cheeks. "Margaret, we've already confirmed our vendors based on quality and budget parameters." "I'm just thinking about long-term relationships. For instance, if we were to work with Gourmet Solutions for catering, they handle events for several other major nonprofits. It could open doors for future collaborations." "The vendors I've selected are perfectly appropriate for this event. They were chosen based on their ability to execute our specific vision within budget." There was a pause on the call. "Leah, I trust your judgment completely. If you're confident in your vendor selections, that's what matters." After the call ended, Leah turned to face Margaret directly. "Don't ever undermine me in front of a client again." Margaret's eyebrows rose with practiced innocence. "I was simply offering input. Isn't collaboration the whole point of working together?" "Collaboration involves discussing concerns privately before presenting alternatives to the client. What you just did was make me look indecisive and unprofessional. I hardly think. I don't care what you think about my vendors or my color choices or my level of sophistication. I'm the lead coordinator on this project, which means my decisions are final unless there's a legitimate operational concern. If you can't work within that structure, you're welcome to find other employment. Margaret's composure slipped for just a moment, revealing a flash of genuine surprise. This wasn't the passive niece she remembered from family gatherings, the young woman who would sit quietly while Margaret offered unsolicited career advice and barely disguised criticism. "Of course," Margaret said smidly. "I apologize if I overstepped. I'm simply accustomed to a more collaborative approach in corporate environments." This isn't a corporate environment. This is my business, my client, and my event. I hired you for your PR expertise, not to redesign my entire approach. As Margaret gathered her materials to leave, Leah caught a glimpse of something that might have been respect in Margaret's expression. Or maybe it was just calculation. Margaret reassessing the balance of power now that Leah had drawn clear boundaries. Either way, it felt like a small victory. He's one of the most influential social media voices covering charity events in the city. And he just told 30,000 people that we're amateurs who can't handle basic communication? I see. Well, I used the contact database I had available. Perhaps if you had provided more current information. Margaret, stop. Leah's voice was sharp enough to cut glass. I gave you access to the Foundation's media database. This is exactly the kind of mistake that could cost us everything. I think you're overreacting. One person's social media complaint hardly constitutes a crisis. Devin Hale's opinion influences half the potential attendees at this event. If he decides we're incompetent, that narrative will spread through the entire social circle we're trying to reach. Leah spent the rest of the morning in damage control mode, reaching out to correct contacts, sending personalized apologies for the confusion, and crafting a response strategy that might contain the fallout from Devin's public criticism. That evening, she asked Margaret to stay after hours for what she euphemistically called a project review. They sat in Leah's small office as the sun set outside, the building quiet around them. "We need to talk about what happened today," Leah began. Margaret straightened in her chair. "I've already explained that I used the available contact information. If there were inaccuracies, that's not entirely my fault." "Margaret, you sent media invitations to email addresses that haven't been active for years. This isn't about blame. It's about the fact that mistakes like this can destroy our credibility." "I hardly think one social media post. Will you please stop minimizing this?" Leah's patience finally snapped. Devin Hale has already influenced 2 other bloggers to question our competence. One of our major sponsors called Evelyn this afternoon asking if there were concerns about the event management. This is exactly the kind of thing that spirals into cancellations and lost funding. For the first time since starting the project, Margaret looked genuinely uncomfortable. I apologize. I should have verified the contact information more carefully. Yes, you should have. And going forward, every piece of communication you send needs to be double-checked. Every contact verified, every email proofread. We cannot afford any more mistakes. Margaret nodded, her usual confidence noticeably dimmed. I assure you, it won't happen again." Leah listened to Margaret work her connections with newfound respect. This was the first time she'd seen her aunt use her corporate experience as a genuine asset rather than a weapon for criticism. Margaret's tone was confident, but respectful, her pitch perfectly calibrated to appeal to the senator's political interests while serving their event needs. "She'll do it," Margaret announced after hanging up. "She'll make the announcement during the dinner portion of the evening, and she'll do a brief press availability afterward." "Margaret, that's brilliant. We make a good team when we're not fighting each other." That evening, they worked late crafting press releases and coordinating with the senator's staff. As they shared takeout Chinese food at Leah's small conference table, Margaret surprised her by laughing at one of Jordan's texts about the charity event war. I have to admit, Margaret said, I haven't had this much fun with a project in years. Corporate events are usually so predictable. Really? I thought you loved the corporate world. I loved the stability and the prestige, but there's something energizing about fighting for something that actually matters, instead of just increasing quarterly profits. For the first time since they'd started working together, Leah saw a glimpse of who Margaret might be when she wasn't trying to prove her superiority or defend her position. Maybe, underneath all the criticism and professional posturing, her aunt actually understood what it felt like to want your work to matter. We're going to crush Devon's little party, Leah said, raising her coffee cup in a mock toast. Absolutely, Margaret agreed, clinking her cup against Leah's. Amateur hour indeed. With less than 2 weeks until the gala, the stress began to show. Leah had been surviving on 3 hours of sleep and endless cups of coffee, while Margaret arrived each morning looking progressively more frayed, despite her attempts to maintain her polished appearance. The small office felt claustrophobic, with vendor samples, seating charts, and timeline spreadsheets covering every available surface. The breaking point came during a meeting with the florist, when Margaret made the mistake of criticizing Leah's choices in front of a vendor. Are we certain about these centerpieces? Margaret asked, examining the sample arrangement with obvious skepticism. The height seems excessive. Our VIP guests might have difficulty conversing across the tables. Leah looked up from her seating chart, exhaustion making her reflexes slower than usual. The height creates visual drama. It's exactly what we discussed in the design meetings. I understand the aesthetic appeal, but functionality should be our priority. Perhaps we could consider something more practical. Margaret turned to the florist. Do you have any lower arrangements that might work better for conversation? The florist glanced between them uncertainly. Well, we could certainly adjust the height if... No, Leah interrupted sharply. The arrangements stay as designed. Thank you for your time, Sandra. I'll confirm the final count by tomorrow. After the florist left, Leah turned to face Margaret with barely controlled fury. My office, now. Margaret followed her to the back corner that served as Leah's private workspace, her usual professional confusion shifting to defensive wariness. I was just offering a practical perspective. Stop, Leah said. Her voice was quiet, but edged with steel. We've been over this. You do not question my decisions in front of vendors. Ever. It makes me look indecisive and undermines my authority as the lead coordinator. I hardly think asking about table conversation constitutes undermining. Margaret, I'm not discussing this anymore. You either respect my role in this project or you leave. Right now. Something in Leah's tone finally penetrated Margaret's defensiveness. Her aunt sat down heavily in the guest chair, her usual rodman posture sagging slightly. I'm sorry. I'm not handling the stress well. It was such an unexpected admission that Leah felt her anger deflate slightly. What do you mean? Margaret was quiet for a long moment, staring at her hands. I've been out of work for 3 months before this project. Not just between jobs, actually unemployed. The consulting contracts dried up, my corporate network isn't returning calls, and I'm 54 years old trying to compete with people half my age who understand social media marketing and digital strategies I've never heard of. Leah sank into her desk chair, seeing her aunt clearly for perhaps the first time. Not the intimidating corporate professional who had always made her feel inadequate, but a woman facing the reality that her industry had evolved past her expertise. I'm scared, Margaret continued, her voice barely above a whisper. I'm scared that if this project fails, I'll never work in PR again. And I'm scared that even if it succeeds, I still won't know how to rebuild my career in a world that's completely different from the one I knew. The vulnerability in Margaret's admission caught Leah off guard. This was a side of her aunt she'd never seen, uncertain, frightened, admitting weakness instead of projecting strength. Is that why you've been so critical? Because you're afraid I'll fail? Partly, but also because watching you work reminds me of how much I've forgotten about actually caring about the work instead of just managing it. You care about every detail because you want the event to be beautiful and meaningful. I've been caring about details because I'm terrified of making mistakes. Leah felt something shift in their understanding of their dynamic. Margaret, you're not going to lose this job because of creative differences about centerpieces, but you might lose it if you keep undermining me in front of clients and vendors. I know, I'm not used to being the subordinate. In my corporate roles, questioning decisions was part of collaborative leadership. But you're right, this is your project, your vision, your business. I need to trust your judgment instead of trying to protect myself by controlling every variable. It's not about subordination, Leah said carefully. It's about clear roles and mutual respect. I value your expertise in PR coordination, but I need you to trust that I know what I'm doing with event design and vendor management. Margaret nodded, looking more tired than Leah had ever seen her. I do trust you. That's what's terrifying. 3 months ago, I would have said you were too inexperienced to handle something like this. But watching you work, you're better at this than I ever was at my job. The admission hung between them, honest and raw, in a way that felt foreign to their relationship. Margaret, can I ask you something? Of course. What are you actually afraid of? Really afraid of? Margaret was quiet for so long that Leah thought she wouldn't answer. When she finally spoke, her voice was small. I'm afraid of becoming irrelevant, of discovering that all those years of climbing corporate ladders and managing campaigns for products I didn't care about has left me with no real skills for work that actually matters. You're building something meaningful, and I'm just trying to not disappear. Leah felt an unexpected surge of sympathy for the woman who had spent years making her feel small and unprepared for the professional world. You're not irrelevant, she said quietly. Senator Williams wouldn't have agreed to speak at our event if you didn't still have valuable relationships and skills. But maybe instead of being afraid of failing, you could focus on contributing to something that succeeds. Margaret looked up, meeting Leah's eyes for the first time in the conversation. You're right. I'll do better. We both will. We're too close to the finish line to let exhaustion make us sloppy. The crisis arrived at 4:30 a.m. on the Friday before the gala in the form of a panicked phone call from the rental company. Miss Carter, I'm so sorry to wake you, but we have a serious problem. The truck carrying your linens, centerpiece bases, and lighting equipment was broken into last night. Everything's gone. Leah sat up in bed, her mind struggling to process the information. Gone? What do you mean gone? Stolen. The police think it was targeted. They knew exactly what they were looking for. Professional job. Miss Carter, I don't know how we're going to replace everything by tomorrow evening. After hanging up, Leah sat in the dark of her bedroom, calculating the impossibility of their situation. Custom linens took weeks to order. The centerpiece bases had been specially designed for their arrangements. The lighting equipment was rented from 3 different companies and fully booked through the weekend. She called Margaret at 5:15 a.m. Leah, what's wrong? Everything. Someone stole our rental truck. All the linens, centerpieces, and lighting are gone. There was a sharp intake of breath. Stolen? Are you certain it wasn't just a break-in for the truck itself? The rental company says it was targeted. They knew exactly what to take. Leah paused, the implications sinking in. Margaret, Devin had access to our vendor list from the foundation's files before his contract ended. He knows exactly what companies we're working with. You think he orchestrated this? I can't prove it, but the timing is awfully convenient. His event is tomorrow night too, and now we're scrambling to replace everything while he looks polished and prepared. Margaret was quiet for a moment. Okay, get dressed.
I'm picking you up in 20 minutes. Where are we going? To save this event. I still have contacts in this city, and it's time to use them. Margaret arrived exactly 20 minutes later, looking more determined than Leah had ever seen her. She'd traded her usual corporate attire for jeans and a sweater, her hair pulled back in a practical ponytail. First stop is Metropolitan Event Supply, Margaret announced as they drove through the pre-dawn streets. The owner owes me a favor from when I helped his daughter get an internship 5 years ago. They won't have our custom linens. No, but they'll have something we can work with. We're going to have to get creative. The next 12 hours blurred together in a frantic scramble across the city. Margaret worked her network with ruthless efficiency, calling in favors that Leah didn't even know existed. A former client donated temporary lighting equipment. A vendor from Margaret's corporate days provided emergency linens in a color that was close enough to work. A florist friend offered to remake all the centerpieces using simpler bases. Leah coordinated the moving pieces, adapting the original design on the fly to work with their replacement materials. Instead of the sophisticated gold and navy scheme they'd planned, they ended up with a more organic look using ivory linens and bronze accents. The centerpieces became lower and more sculptural, incorporating candles and natural elements that actually improved the overall aesthetic. This is better, Leah admitted around 3 p.m., stepping back to look at a sample table set up in the rental warehouse. It's more intimate, more artistic, less formal, but more memorable. Margaret smiled, exhaustion evident in the lines around her eyes. Sometimes the best solutions come from working with constraints instead of fighting them. I can't believe you pulled this together in one day. I can't believe you redesigned an entire event aesthetic in 8 hours and made it look intentional. As they loaded the final rental truck, Leah realized something had fundamentally shifted between them. Margaret had spent the day using her connections not to control or criticize, but to solve problems and support Leah's vision. And Leah had let Margaret take the lead on vendor coordination, trusting her judgment instead of second-guessing every decision. Margaret? Yes? Thank you. I couldn't have done this without you. Margaret's smile was tired but genuine. That's what partners do. The ballroom at the Grandview Hotel sparkled like something from a fairy tale. The last-minute design changes had transformed the space into something more magical than their original vision. Ivory linens caught the candlelight, bronze accents gleamed warmly, and the lower centerpieces created intimate conversation spaces while still providing visual drama. "You clean up nice," Jordan said, appearing at her elbow in his rented tuxedo.
I can't believe we pulled this off. I can. You've been planning this event in your head for 3 years. It was always going to be spectacular. Margaret approached from the registration table, elegant in a navy dress that complemented the color scheme perfectly. The first wave of VIPs is arriving. Senator Williams is ready whenever you give the signal. How do you feel? Leah asked. Terrified and exhilarated, also proud. Margaret's smile was different tonight, less polished, more genuine. I've worked on a lot of events over the years, but this one feels important. The evening unfolded with smooth precision. Guests mingled during the cocktail hour, admiring the artwork displays that showcased the foundation's scholarship recipients. The silent auction tables drew steady crowds, and Leah could see Evelyn circulating among major donors with evident satisfaction. Devon's rival event was clearly struggling by comparison. Jordan had been monitoring social media throughout the evening and reported that attendance appeared sparse, with several originally committed sponsors making last-minute switches to support the foundation instead. Devon's been posting every 20 minutes trying to generate buzz. Desperation doesn't look good on him, Jordan whispered during dinner service. The highlight of the evening came during Evelyn's speech when she called Leah to the stage for recognition. This year's gala represents exactly the kind of innovation and dedication we hope to inspire in our scholarship recipients, Evelyn said, her voice carrying clearly through the ballroom.
When faced with challenges that would have defeated most people, our event coordinator, Leah Carter, demonstrated the creativity, leadership, and perseverance that transforms obstacles into opportunities. The beautiful event you're experiencing tonight is a testament to her vision and commitment. The applause was warm and sustained, and Leah felt a rush of accomplishment that had nothing to do with proving anyone wrong and everything to do with knowing she'd created something meaningful. Senator Williams' announcement brought a surge of media attention that made Devon's event look like a local fundraiser by comparison. The press area filled with reporters and cameras, and Leah watched Margaret coordinate the media logistics with professional competence that impressed even the veteran political journalists. As the evening wound down and guests began to leave, Margaret found Leah near the silent option tables, tallying the final bidding results. "We exceeded the fundraising goal by 30%, Leah announced. "Not we, you. This was your vision, your event, your success." Leah looked up at her aunt, really looked at her, and saw something she'd never seen before. Pride, yes, but not the condescending pride of someone claiming credit for another person's achievement. Genuine admiration for work well done. "Margaret, you saved this event today. If you hadn't had those connections, hadn't been able to coordinate replacement vendors, if you hadn't been able to redesign everything on the fly and make it look intentional, all the vendors in the world wouldn't have mattered." They stood together in comfortable silence, watching the catering staff begin the cleanup process while the last guests lingered over coffee and conversation. "You know," Margaret said quietly, "I spent so many years thinking success meant controlling every variable and minimizing risk. But watching you work, real success means caring enough about something to take risks for it. I learned something too. I thought proving myself meant doing everything alone, but tonight happened because we worked together." Margaret nodded toward the nearly empty ballroom, where a few couples were still dancing to the soft jazz quartet. "So, what's next for the famous event coordinator?" "Evelyn's already talking about next year's gala, and apparently Senator Williams wants to discuss campaign events." Leah grinned. "I think I'm going to need a bigger office. I know a PR consultant who might be available for ongoing collaboration." "Is she any good?" "She's learning to be." The morning after the gala, Leah woke up in her own bed for the first time in weeks without an alarm clock jarring her into consciousness. Sunlight streamed through her bedroom window,
And for a moment, she lay still, marveling at the quiet. No vendor calls to return, no timelines to adjust, no crises to manage. Just the peaceful silence of a job well done. Her phone buzzed with text messages that had accumulated overnight. Congratulations from other event planners in the city. Thank you notes from gala attendees, and 3 new client inquiries forwarded by Evelyn. The local newspaper's society page featured a full-color photo of the ballroom with the headline, "Foundation Gala Sets New Standard for Charity Events." Even Devon Hale had posted a grudging acknowledgement on social media. "Impressive recovery from last-minute challenges. Credit where credit is due." But the message that surprised her most was from Margaret. "Brunch at Cafe Luna at 11? I'm buying. We need to talk about the future." Cafe Luna was a small bistro near the university, the kind of place where graduate students lingered over coffee and professors graded papers at worn wooden tables. It was nothing like the upscale restaurants where Margaret usually conducted business meetings, and Leah wondered what had prompted the choice. She found Margaret already seated at a corner table, looking oddly relaxed in jeans and a simple sweater. Gone was the armor of corporate professionalism that had defined her for as long as Leah could remember. Instead, she looked like someone who had finally stopped trying to prove something to the world. "You look different," Leah said, sliding into the opposite chair. "I feel different. Yesterday changed something for me. I've been thinking about what you said, about focusing on contributing to something that succeeds, instead of being afraid of failing. And I realized I've spent the last decade of my career managing campaigns for products and services I didn't care about, working for companies whose missions meant nothing to me beyond a paycheck. I'd forgotten what it felt like to wake up excited about the work itself. Leah studied her aunt's face, seeing a peace there that she'd never noticed before. "What are you saying?" "I'm saying I don't want to go back to corporate consulting. I want to do work that matters, work like what we did together these past weeks." Margaret reached into her bag and pulled out a manila folder, sliding it across the table. "I've been up since 5 this morning putting together a proposal. I want us to consider making this partnership official." Leah opened the folder to find a detailed business plan for Carter Weber Event Management, complete with financial projections, service offerings, and a proposed division of responsibilities. Margaret had clearly put significant thought into the structure. Leah would handle creative direction and client relations, while Margaret would manage PR, vendor negotiations, and business development. "You want to work for me permanently? I want to work with you, as partners. Equal stake, equal say in major decisions, but with clear divisions of expertise." Margaret's voice carried none of her usual corporate authority. Instead, it held the tentative hope of someone asking for a second chance. Leah flipped through the pages, impressed despite herself by the thoroughness of Margaret's planning. The financial projections showed how they could afford a proper office space, hire additional staff for larger events, and build towards handling multiple high-profile clients simultaneously. This is comprehensive. I've learned a few things about business planning over the years. But Leah, I need you to understand something. This only works if you believe I can actually change. If you think I'll just go back to being critical and controlling, then we should shake hands now and go our separate ways. Leah set down the proposal and looked directly at her aunt. "Can you change?" Margaret was quiet for a long moment, considering the question with obvious seriousness. "I think yesterday proved I'm capable of putting the work before my ego when it really matters. But old habits are hard to break. I'll probably slip sometimes, revert to questioning your decisions or trying to manage things that aren't my responsibility. And when that happens, you call me on it, just like you did yesterday, and I listen, adjust, and do better." Margaret's smile was rueful. "I'm 54 years old, Leah. I'm probably not going to become a completely different person overnight. But I can learn to be a better version of myself." "What changed your mind about working together?" "Honestly, watching you handle the crisis yesterday. When everything fell apart, you didn't panic or blame anyone or try to control things you couldn't control. You just adapted. You saw problems as puzzles to solve instead of disasters to survive. I've never been able to do that."
Margaret paused, stirring her coffee thoughtfully. "I spent my whole career believing that success meant preventing problems from happening in the first place. But you showed me that real skill means solving problems creatively when they inevitably do happen." "It wasn't just me yesterday. You made calls I never could have made, used relationships I didn't have. We solved it together." "Exactly. And that's what I want, to be part of solving things instead of just trying to prevent them." Leah closed the folder and leaned back in her chair. The proposal was thorough and financially sound, but more importantly, she could see genuine change in Margaret's demeanor. The defensiveness was gone, replaced by something that looked like humility. "I need to think about this." "Of course, take all the time you need. But Leah, I want you to know that regardless of what you decide about the partnership, yesterday taught me something important about respect. I spent years thinking I needed to prove I was smarter or more experienced than you. But watching you work, seeing what you've built, I'm genuinely proud of you. Not in a condescending way, but in the way you're proud of someone you admire." The admission hung between them, honest and vulnerable, in a way that transformed their relationship entirely. For the first time in her adult life, Leah felt like she was having a conversation with Margaret as equals. "Can I ask you something? Anything? Why did you always make me feel like I wasn't good enough? Even when I was younger, it felt like you were constantly pointing out everything I was doing wrong." Margaret's expression grew pained. "Because I was terrified you'd make the same mistakes I did. I built my career on playing it safe, on following other people's definitions of success, instead of figuring out what actually mattered to me. When I saw you choosing art history, then event planning, then starting your own business, it scared me because you were taking risks I never had the courage to take. So you tried to talk me out of it. I tried to protect you from failure by convincing you to choose safer paths. But yesterday I realized that your willingness to take risks isn't a flaw I needed to correct. It's a strength I never developed." They sat in comfortable silence for a while, the weight of years of misunderstanding finally lifting between them. "I have one condition," Leah said finally. "Name it." "No more family dinners where you give me career advice. If we're partners, we keep family stuff and business stuff separate." Margaret laughed, a genuine, unguarded sound that Leah had rarely heard from her. "Deal. Although I reserve the right to be proud of you at family gatherings. I can live with that." Later that afternoon, Leah drove to Riverside Park and walked to the old wooden bench where her father used to sit and sketch. It had been his favorite spot in the city, a quiet place overlooking the river where he'd taught her to see beauty in ordinary moments and turn them into something meaningful. The bench was weathered now, showing years of seasons and visitors, but it remained solid and welcoming. She sat down and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the photos from the gala. The images told the story of her transformation, from the nervous young woman who had taken her father's advice to create something beautiful and turned it into a business, to the confident professional who had salvaged a crisis and turned it into triumph. But more than that, they showed her standing beside Margaret, not as a subordinate or a rival, but as a true collaborator. In one photo, she and Margaret were working side by side during the setup, both focused intently on adjusting a centerpiece. Their body language spoke of partnership rather than hierarchy. Two professionals combining their expertise towards a common goal. It was a dynamic Leah had never imagined possible with her aunt. Her father would have loved seeing this evolution, she realized. He'd always believed that the most beautiful creations came from unexpected collaborations, from people bringing different perspectives together to build something neither could achieve alone. Art isn't just about individual vision. Sometimes the most beautiful things happen when we learn to blend our colors with someone else's. Her phone rang with Evelyn's number, interrupting her reflection. "Leah, I hope you're getting some rest after last night." "I'm starting to. Thank you again for the opportunity."
Actually, that's why I'm calling. I've had 3 calls this morning from other nonprofits who want to discuss events with you. The Children's Hospital wants to talk about their spring benefit. The Arts Council is interested in their annual auction. And the Education Initiative is looking for someone to handle their donor appreciation events. Leah felt a thrill of excitement mixed with slight overwhelm. That's incredible. And Senator Williams's campaign manager wants to meet next week about handling events for her gubernatorial run. Apparently, the way you managed last night's announcement impressed some very influential people. Leah smiled, watching a pair of ducks paddle peacefully down the river. That sounds wonderful, but also like more work that I can handle alone. That brings me to the main reason for my call. The Hartford Foundation Board was so impressed with last night that we'd like to offer you a retainer for ongoing event management. Not just the annual gala, but smaller fundraisers throughout the year, quarterly donor events, and special project celebrations. It would provide steady income while you build your client base. As Evelyn outlined the financial details, a monthly retainer that would cover Leah's basic expenses plus project fees for individual events,
Leah felt a weight lift from her shoulders. For 3 years, she'd lived with the constant stress of uncertain income, never knowing if the next client would come through or if a canceled event would mean she couldn't pay rent. "The retainer alone would let me hire staff and rent proper office space," Leah said, hardly believing the numbers Evelyn was quoting. "Exactly. We want to invest in your growth because we believe you're going to become one of the premier event planners in the city. Last night proved you have both the creative vision and the crisis management skills that our donors value." As Evelyn outlined the scope of work, monthly networking events, quarterly major donor dinners, annual gala, and special project celebrations, Leah thought about Margaret's partnership proposal, about the office space they could afford, about the team they could build. For the first time since starting her business, she could envision a future that was both financially stable and creatively fulfilling. "There's one thing I should mention," Leah said carefully. "I'm considering bringing on a partner, someone who specializes in PR and business development." "That sounds like smart growth planning. Anyone I know?" "Actually, yes. Margaret Weber." There was a pause. "Margaret? From the consulting work she did for us?" "I know it might seem surprising given how things started, but we discovered we work very well together when we're focused on the same goals. Her connections and PR expertise would be invaluable for expanding the business. Based on how she handled the media coordination last night, I think that could be an excellent partnership. I'd love to meet with both of you to discuss the retainer terms." "I'm very interested," she told Evelyn, "but I should mention that I'm considering bringing on a partner, someone who specializes in PR and business development." "That sounds like smart growth planning. I'd love to meet them when you're ready." After hanging up, Leah sat quietly for several more minutes, processing the magnitude of what had just happened. In the span of 24 hours, she'd gone from struggling small business owner to having more opportunities than she could handle alone. The retainer from the Hartford Foundation would provide the financial security she'd never had, while the additional client inquiries offered the kind of growth she'd only dreamed about. She thought about the journey that had brought her here. The years of financial uncertainty, the family gatherings where Margaret's questions had made her doubt her choices, the late nights spent wondering if she was crazy to think she could build a meaningful business in such a competitive field. All of those struggles had led to this moment, sitting on her father's favorite bench with concrete proof that taking risks could lead to extraordinary rewards. But perhaps the most unexpected part of this success was discovering that Margaret could be an ally rather than an obstacle. The woman who had spent years making Leah feel inadequate had become instrumental in her biggest professional triumph. It was a reminder that people could change, that relationships could evolve, and that sometimes the most challenging dynamics could transform into the most valuable partnerships. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jordan. "Saw the newspaper coverage. You're officially famous now. Lunch tomorrow to celebrate?" Another message came from the florist. "Thank you for an incredible event. The photos are already generating inquiries for our services." Then one from the catering manager. "Best event we've worked in years. Would love to be your preferred vendor for future galas."
Each message represented a relationship built, a reputation established, a network expanded. This was how businesses grew, not just through individual brilliance, but through collaborative excellence that made everyone involved look good. Her father used to tell her that the most successful artists were those who made everyone around them better. Real talent, he'd said, isn't about outshining others. It's about creating work so beautiful that it elevates everyone who touches it. Looking back on the gala, Leah realized she'd finally understood what he meant. The event had succeeded not because she'd done everything perfectly, but because she'd created an environment where everyone, Margaret, the vendors, the foundation staff, even the guests, could contribute their best work towards something meaningful. She pulled up Margaret's contact information and typed a message. "Just got off the phone with Evelyn.
The foundation wants to offer us a retainer for ongoing events, plus I have 3 new client inquiries. Ready to build something together? The response came back almost immediately. I've been waiting for this call my entire career. When do we start? Leah smiled, typing back, "How about Monday? I know a perfect coffee shop where we can plan our future. I'll bring the business plan, you bring the vision. Deal." And Margaret? Yes, thank you for yesterday, for the partnership proposal, for finally seeing me as someone worth working with instead of someone who needs to be managed. Thank you for showing me what real leadership looks like. See you Monday, partner. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.